to moderate the question session. Well, we've listened to 3 presentations, and now we want to take questions. I don't want to lead. I prefer to do mine last. But I think all of these have kind of generated a conversation about conflicts between religion, the dictates of religion, and of course what we actually practice in our own in situations in Egypt, in Lungangeju, and also talking about the Moroccan experience in North Africa. So you can now ask questions. We have about 30 minutes. I'll take the first round of questions, but please introduce yourself before you ask any question. Thank you. So the first round, I will take it from this side. Please be brief. We want to have 2 sessions of questions.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. My name is Ahmed Salisu Garba from Nigeria. My question goes to the first speaker, Jeremy Gunn. So, I want to know this relationship of religion, politics, and law in North Africa. Are you developing a thesis, a specific thesis for this, or what exactly is the argument? Thank you.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? There was some talking.
Okay, yes, you spoke on religion, politics, and law in North Africa, and you identified 3 main areas of misunderstanding. So my question is, what argument are you advancing specifically? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the next person. We'll come back here. No.
Thank you very much for your very interesting speeches. This is a question mainly to Jerry.
Can we have your name, please?
Yeah, my name is Hans Roth from Stockholm University, Sweden. A question mainly raised to Jeremy. I wonder your third point about the secular state and the misunderstanding. Do I interpret you right if I say that, well, secularism or religious neutrality, these are not the master concepts. The master concepts are freedom of religion. That's a kind of deeper justification for religious neutrality and secularism. But too much debate have focused upon the concepts of secularism and religious neutrality.
Thank you. Yes, the man. The right one here.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Boyce Wanda. I teach law at the University of Namibia. My question is towards, again, Professor Gunn. Or is it Gunn? Thank you very much, Professor, for throwing some clarity and light, at least to me, on the nature of the Sharia. From your speech, it would appear that the popular notion that we have about Islam being a violent religion is misconceived, at least from what I have understood from your speech, that originally the law is the law of God, the Sharia is the law of God, and it's perfect and unchanging. But from your own experience in that part of Africa, why is it that we get the notion that Islam is a violent religion and that the majority are perhaps swayed? But from your speech now, it would appear that the majority are silent. Why is it that the minority are, in fact, at the forefront of what we perceive to be the violent area in the Middle East?
Thank you very much. Yes, the last row.
This question's Ian Benson. This question's for Professor Gunn. You described 4 different meanings or approaches to Sharia, and then discussed very interestingly the rise of violence as being something that's relatively recent. I think you sort of gave 1980 as a period. I'm curious because the rise of violence would seem to implicate several of the different versions of Sharia you described. You have the symbolic, clearly. You have the debate about human interpretation, particularly as it's represented within the different schools of Islam. And then clearly you have some of those people involved in the violence professing this idea of Sharia as unchanging and pure, and the corrupt aspects of other groups being the reason for the violence. But I wanted to try and see what you would identify as the cause of this recent upsurge or rise of violence. Do you attribute it to something psychological, something sociological, or a mixture of these things?
Thank you very much. Please, we're coming back for the second round of questions this way, but then I want my panel to please respond. Then we take the second round of questions. Yeah, Professor.
I don't have any answers to any of the questions. Let me try some brief responses to questions that are interesting and things that I would have liked to have elaborated but was unable to. First question is, what is the relationship among religion, politics, and law in North Africa, particularly? Let me start this by giving maybe an anecdote or a brief experience. When I started working in the area of religion and law, I thought that the problem came from judges making bad interpretations of laws or constitutions. After a while, I started deciding, began to conclude that the problem was not that the judges had problems, though I think some do, but the constitutions and statutes are written poorly or incorrectly. After another bit of time, I decided the problem comes from some societal assumptions about the relationship between religion and law, which the constitutions and statutes reflect and the judges reflect. So it's more of a societal issue. So if we look at now going to the question of religion, politics, and law in North Africa, speaking just in very general terms, there are popular desires to have the state embody Sharia or embody religious law. And let me just say this is not unique to North Africa. We could even go to the example of the United States, where some people think that the United States is, quote, a Christian nation, end quote, or it's a nation that is founded on, quote, Judeo-Christian principles, end quote, and that the laws of the state should reflect those. So we have the promotion of saying there should be a connection between religion and the state in the United States. We have that also in North Africa. That's making, I think, a mistake on what the proper relationship should be. That the state should not be promoting religion for the reason that typically, I think, that when the state promotes religion, it promotes what I would call a political religion, and it's a form of religion that is designed either to support certain interest groups within the state or the interests of politicians. So again, making a reference to the United States, I note that probably the decade in the United States history when religion was most involved in public discussions was during the 1950s. So President Eisenhower repeatedly spoke, both when he was running for president and when he was president, about the importance of religious values and that we need to take religious values seriously. I also note that prior to 1952, President Eisenhower, or then General Eisenhower, was not on record for ever having made any public statement about religion whatsoever. In his book called Crusade in Europe, where he talked about World War II, he never mentioned religion once. After he left the White House, he once again never mentioned religion. So are we to assume that this is a very pious person who forgot about religion before he went into politics and then forgot about it afterwards? Or is this an instrumentalized use of religion? And my suggestion is that whether it's in North Africa or in the United States, there is an attempt to instrumentalize religion in order to pursue other interests of the state. And that's not necessarily simply, that's not simply the politicians doing it, but that is also what society would like as well. With regard to what the secular state is and what the secular state should be, and I didn't, because of time constraints, don't go into a long explanation of what I would mean by secular or not, but just very briefly, I would say that a secular state does not claim to have religious authority to be making decisions about the state. We could contrast that with the theocratic state that believes that it has religious authority in order to make decisions. So a secular state doesn't do that. Now, there are different kinds of secular states. You could have an authoritarian communist state that wants to suppress religion, or you could have a state that says people should be able to practice the religion that they choose, provided that they don't engage in violent activities or other such things. So what I would assume is not only a state that is not claiming religious authority, but a state that doesn't show religious preferences, and a state that allows the practice of religion. With regard to the Sharia question, what the overall point that I would hope to make is that in using Sharia, human beings should be very modest and not be assuming that they can speak for God. That at most they say, this is my understanding of Sharia. I find that people who say, my understanding of Sharia is true and I am going to kill my opponents, are not taking that modest approach, that they are in fact themselves committing the blasphemy of thinking that they speak for God. So the Sharia should be used modestly. That is, when people are trying to speak about what Sharia is, they should speak with modesty. And in some ways, the contrast of that, the exact opposite of that, is taking certain symbols out of context and using them, calling them Sharia, and then attempting to punish people or suppress viewpoints that don't fit because it does not conform with these modest forms of Sharia. Last question had to do, and I'm not giving credit to the question, so I apologize, but I also don't want to take too much time. Last question is on violence and Islam, and I use the year 1979 as a starting place, and we do not have the spectacular examples of violence in Islam before that time. If we look at what is happening with Islam now in the 21st century, I challenge anyone to go back any time in the history of Islam to find anything that compares with what's going on. Even if we talk about Muslim conquest in the 7th century, we don't have anything that even remotely compares with what Al-Qaeda is doing or with what ISIS is doing. This is a whole new language. It's a whole new approach. So why does this happen? Is it psychological? Is it frustration, aggression? Is this deprived economic circumstances? Well, that's a big question which can't be answered in a minute. And I assume that it is a combination of several different things. One of the most important ones is a frustration with the position of the Muslim world compared to the rest of the world. That if we go back to 11th century through 15th century, or 10th century through 15th century, the Muslim world is at the peak of world civilization. Something happened, in the words of Bernard Lewis, and I'm not a fan of Bernard Lewis, something went wrong. And beginning in the 19th century, there was an examination of why are we in the position that we are in now. And some people say it is because of what we have done that is wrong, and others will say it is because of our enemies. So often it's going to be, for violence is defining yourself and defining your standard by reference to somebody else whom you think of as being bad. Sorry, that's not, again, not satisfactory. But
Thank you very much. Mohammed?
So first, I have a question for Professor Jeremy. You did a great job defining the concept of Islamic Sharia. But is there a difference between Islamic Sharia and Islamic law? Second thing, I want to follow up regarding the question of having a secular Islamic state. If we agree together that the secular state calls for the separation of a state and religion, having a secular Islamic state is impossible. I mean, you know, in a typical Islamic state or in a classical Islamic state, and, you know, mark my words, I'm talking about the true Islamic state, not about what is going right now in countries that they are elite to be Muslim. In a typical Islamic state, Islam, the religion, should be reflected in all of the state's activities, whether on the executive level, the legislature, or even the judiciary. Simply because Islam is not only a religion, it's a societal and, in fact, a legal system. So it should be reflected in all of the states' activity. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, he is a prominent Islamic scholar, sums up what I'm saying right now when he said that Islam rejects the idea to leave what belongs to Caesar, and what belongs to God. He said in Islam, Caesar and what belongs to him, Caesar and what he owns belongs to God. So that's why I'm saying, you know, if you agree with me that a secular state calls for a full separation between the state and the religion, this is not going to happen in an Islamic state. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Because there are no questions for Latigo yet, Professor Hackett would prefer that if there's any question, she's going to write it down and give it to Latigo to effectively have that when reworking his paper. So we take the second round of questions and we start with you. You have the microphone.
Thank you. Abadir Ibrahim from St. Thomas University in Miami, Florida. And also, I'm also from Ethiopia. And so my question was, quick question to Jeremy Gunn. Is there reference to Sharia as morality rather than, and I'm asking this question specifically from an Ethiopian position where there's reference of Sharia is about halal and haram and heaven and hell. The discussion is usually at that level and not about legislation. A quick question to Muhammad. Did I hear you wrong, or did you say that the treatment of Copts under Sharia law does not violate human rights? And if you did make that statement, do you think that the payment of head tax, non-equality under the law, limited political rights, inability to serve in the military and possibly in law enforcement, so on and so forth, you know, these types of discriminations you don't think violates the principle of equality?
Thank you. The next person? Is here? Just.
Thank you. My question is directed at...
Your name, please. Your name.
My name is Wahab
affiliation.
Shitu.
Affiliation.
I'm the Coordinator Center for Human Rights, University of Lagos. My question is directed to Jeremy Gunn. I want to have your assessment on the role of religion, politics, and law as it affects women in South Africa, and whether these elements play positive impact on the role of women particularly.
Any other question? We have two on the floor. Okay, if there are no other questions, permit me to add this, and I think it should go for the panel. When you say there are clashes of interest, and that suggests conflict, and how do we resolve this conflict? I'm particularly interested in Muhammad, and talking again, giving the same question to Professor Arquette. I think based on your experience of African religious roots, how can we resolve this conflict? So let's start with Africa. We start with you.
But I'm not Professor.
Not from Latingo. I know you are very conversant
But I
with
think that's
African.
departing from the protocol.
Okay, no problem. Mohammed?
So regarding the question of equality between Muslims and Copts, I was talking just, from Egyptian perspective. But, of course, I believe that, subjecting, Christians in Egypt to Islamic law or Islamic Sharia does not, violate their human rights. So you heard me correctly. Right now, in Egypt, as I said, the Supreme Constitutional Court, just before the launch, we were listening to Professor Kufi, and he was talking about the role of courts, in interpreting the laws and the constitutions. And as I told you, in Egypt, the Supreme Constitutional Court came up with a very liberal approach in interpreting Article 2. So it said that, when Article 2 said the principles of Islamic Sharia are the main source of legislation, this means that laws should be consistent with human rights and welfare. And so laws, will be applied on Muslims and non-Muslims in Egypt, in Christians and Jews in Egypt. So, if the legislature enacted a law that violates, human rights and welfare, and, the legislature just justified the legislation saying that it is consistent with Islamic law or Islamic Sharia, then the Supreme Constitutional Court has the right to reject the law or to overturn the law, because in 1993, as I told you, the Supreme Constitutional Court said that according to Article 2, no law should violate human rights and welfare. So I think, subjecting Christians in Egypt to Article 2, to the meaning of Article 2, which listed the principles of Islamic Sharia as the main source of legislation, will not hurt or harm their human rights. But I'm only talking from an Egyptian perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Gunn?
First, let me respond to the question and comment made by my colleague Mohammed. When he made his quotation from Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, I had exactly that quotation in front of me. And I'd like to try and present this in a context that I think that is useful. First, the statement that comes out of Christianity is, of course, Jesus is render unto Caesar that which is Caesar. In response to that, Qaradawi says, so repeating the same quotation, Islam does not accept the rule, leave to Caesar what is Caesar and to God what is God's. In Islam, Caesar and what he owns belong to God the One. Okay, so that's Qaradawi. I'd like to give a hadith from the Prophet, one judged to be sahih, so something we would assume to be an authentic, reliable hadith. And this Rosalind made reference earlier to cross-fertilization, so we'll go back to this. So this is about the Prophet. So while he is in Medina, he walks by and he sees people doing, I don't know what we call it, cross-pollinating plants. So this is the hadith. So, person recounting, I passed by some palm trees with the messenger of Allah, with Muhammad, and he saw some people pollinating the trees. He said, what are these people doing? They said, they are taking something from the male part of the plant and putting it in the female part of the plant. The Prophet then said, I do not think that will do any good. Later, news of that reached the people who were doing the cross-pollinating, and they stopped doing it immediately because of what the Prophet had said. And their yield from plants went down. The Prophet later heard that this had caused a problem, and so he said, that was only my thought, that is, you shouldn't cross-pollinate the plant. If it will do any good, then do it. I am only a human being, like you, and what I think may be right or wrong. But when I tell you Allah says something, I will never tell lies about Allah. Now, that's not separation of religion and the state, but that's separation of human knowledge and human activity from divine knowledge and divine activity. And that's the point that I would like to stress. We have the divine knowledge, which is the true Sharia, And then we have what people attempt to do with that. And the concern that I have is that in trying to decide what divine law is, that is by using fiqh, human reasoning, human understanding, human rationality, you're likely going to make mistakes. And you don't make the assumption that you know when you don't know. So you need to be modest about it. You need to be humble about that. You need to say things like, this is my best understanding of it, not this is God's truth, and I have the authority to punish people who don't accept that. So, question, is there a difference between Sharia and Islamic law? And the answer is absolutely yes, there is, though the problem is people attempt to make the two as if they are the same, and they are not the same. On the question is, what about Sharia and morality? I must say I'd never thought of that before. And so this is an off-the-cuff response, is the way that I see Sharia is a different kind of language from morality. Certainly nothing in Sharia would be immoral, but morality suggests sort of a different kind of standard from divine law, but it's more complicated than that, and that's just an initial response. Finally, on the question of religion and women, the former UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief, Abdel Fattah al-Moor, wrote a paper, I would guess, around 12 years ago, which is the first major analysis I had seen on the role of religion and women. I thought it was a particularly insightful piece. It was written originally in French. I think it's been translated, but I'm not sure. What the problem, I mean, to the extent that women as human beings make decisions to agree to accept something as religion or not, whether it is ability to hold the priesthood or not hold the priesthood, that can be one area of decision, and human beings should be able to make their own choice. The problem becomes when the state attempts to take certain aspects of religion, to reify them, to solidify them, and then treat them not as this is our understanding, but this once again is divine law, can do a lot of damage to human beings, whether it is in Islam or Judaism or in Christianity. So once again, the standard ought to be something like humility and not having the fiery belief that you are implementing God's will and using the state in order to implement it.
Thank you very much. Without much ado, we have only 3 minutes more, and I want to call you to join me in thanking this panel for a job well done on presentation of paper and the responses to the questions as raised. A round of applause for that. I also want to thank you very much for being part of the session, especially those who raised questions. We really appreciate you. So on behalf of my panel, I say very much thank you to you. So thank you everybody for being part of this. I think we have a break now, and after the break, we'll be coming back at 1800 for the conference dinner, and there could be speech or speakers as stated on the program. Thank you very much.